Thank you. Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. I just want to start by saying that this is not an essay about Joker 2 Folie Deux. I mean, it is, technically, but also it isn't. It's kind of about something else, and I don't want to spoil that just yet. So I'll prattle on about Joker 2 Folie Deux for a while. Probably too long. And then at one point the lights will go out, and when they come back on, I'll go on to talk about another thing before bringing it all back together at the end. So just pay attention, keep up, and everything will make sense by the end. Okay? Okay.
So you decided to do this next essay in the form of a stand-up comedy show?
Yeah. That's the idea, yeah. Well, part of it anyway. It's supposed to be like that, yeah.
Are you under the impression that you think you're funny? One of the funny people?
I mean, I'm not. I know I'm not a comedian, or anything. I'm trying to be funny, though. I think I can.
No, it's just it's interesting.
And so, while it isn't really about Joker 2 Folie Deux, I will be spoiling Joker 2 Folie Deux in this essay. Though frankly, spoiling Joker 2 Folie Deux feels like worrying about spoiling a casserole made of dog excrement by adding too much coriander. I'll be spoiling the ending of Joker 2 Folie Deux, and in fact, many of the major plot points of the film Joker 2 Folie Deux as well. So if you've not seen Joker 2 Folie Deux and you don't want it spoiled for you, you should stop this video and go and watch it and come back and finish watching this after. Actually, no, fuck you. Stay, watch this video instead. Watching Joker 2 Folie Deux is not a good use of your time. And you won't need to have seen it to enjoy this. I promise. Or at least I hope. So, have you ever watched a comedian bomb? It's a really unpleasant experience for everyone involved. I mean, properly, irretrievably, existentially bomb. Not just like a bad gig, like a black hole of humour where laughter goes to die. I worked at the City Cafe during the Edinburgh Fringe one year. Downstairs was this comedy night. Bunch of posh English lads with names like Rupert and Jasper and faces like knees braying out the most tired, hackneyed material imaginable. A room so silent aghast you could hear the desperation dripping off each and every one of their public school relics. Joke after joke just thudding to the ground, dead. At one point, I prayed for a fire alarm, or a bomb threat, or an actual bomb. The Joker 2 Folie Deux isn't that bad, but it isn't too far off. Joker 2 Folie Deux is the 2024 sequel nobody wanted to 2019's Joker, a film that we should have known better than to want in the first place. Both directed by Todd Phillips from screenplays he co-wrote with Scott Silver, Joker 2019 is a film which I hated, like a lot. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not interested in being one of those clearly very hinged and normal individuals who comes onto the internet to rant about how the popular thing is bad and have that be their entire personalities. I take no pleasure in hating any piece of art. I'm not one of those red-eyed lunatics making 6-hour YouTube screeds titled "Why the Last Jedi is Feminist Propaganda" or "Every Pothole in She-Hulk Exposed, all caps." I'm not here to yell in yellow fonts about wokeness, you know, for the clicks. I have too much dignity for that. But I would also like to make it clear that if you liked Joker 2019, or Joker 2 Folie Deux for that matter, then that's fine. Art speaks to different people in different ways, and has everything to do with where you're coming from, where it's coming from, and where you both meet. You met Joker at your terminally online 4chan incel edgelord phase of your life. And I met Joker as a grown man who had already seen Taxi Driver. We're all on our own journey. No, but seriously, I'm not mad at you if you liked either of those films, just so long as you don't get mad at me for not liking them. I'm just telling you the way that I see them. When I say I hated Joker 2019, I want you to understand that I wasn't caught up in the moral panic that had some folks worried that the film might inspire real-world violence because of its nihilistic vision or its apparent pandering to incels. It would need to elicit some genuine emotion to be in any danger of doing that. And I also am interested in being a contrarian, so was not affected by any of the praise that was heaped on the film when it won the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, or when it went on to be very successful. I hated the film, mostly because it's a bad film. About as deep as a piss puddle in a filthy men's public toilet, as derivative as a GCSE drama piece, and as boring as reading the complete terms of service on Microsoft Teams. Uninspired, insipid, cynical, tiresome, and inept. For me, it falls at almost every possible hurdle. On a technical level, it's maybe above adequately made. It looks quite good, the production design is nice, the editing flows fine, and the performances are pretty good, I guess. Phoenix is actually excellent, but dearie me, the rest is just so awful. A quick rundown of the plot before I list my many issues with it. Spoilers ahead, of course. Arthur Fleck is a clown for hire in 1980s Gotham because, sure, Gotham needed its own decade apparently. He dreams of being a stand-up comic, but life just keeps beating him down. He lives with his mum, he has involuntary laughing fits, he's got no social skills, he's got mental health problems. Essentially, he's every open mic comedian you've ever met. And one day, after being fired for dropping a gun in a children's hospital, he shoots 3 yuppies on the train home, as one does. From there, things spiral. He does some bad stand-up, which he thinks goes well. It doesn't. He thinks he's dating the beautiful girl next door. He isn't. He thinks he's the billionaire Thomas Wayne's illegitimate son. He also isn't. He kills his mum and he goes on a talk show where he delivers a big speech about society. Then he shoots the host live on air. Riots kick off and somehow, inexplicably, the disenfranchised masses decide this greasy, pitiful little man is their hero. And he becomes the Joker. End of film. Now let's start with the least important of my gripes. Giving us an origin story for a character that works best without one is one thing, but making it this uninteresting and lame is frankly criminal. Next, I'm tired of filmmakers and comic book fanboys being embarrassed by the medium that these movies are being adapted from, and thinking that going self-importantly dark and gritty is the only way to get people to take them seriously. You know, it's actually mature because it's got swearing and blood and sex in it. Actually. This goes for Nolan trying to make Batman realistic, or Snyder for thinking that the ultra-violence in Watchmen is supposed to be cool, or even Bryan Singer deciding not to put the X-Men in comics accurate costumes. And it especially goes for Phillips deciding that it was a great idea to basically graft the aesthetics of classic Martin Scorsese movies, Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, onto parts of Alan Moore and Brian Bolland's comic book Joker origin story, The Killing Joke. Don't adapt to comics if you think comics are childish and dumb.
There's not a part of you that thinks this is incredibly smug and pretentious. You know, maybe a bit misguided and misleading and just like stupid. No, not a part of you that thinks that.
Some of it, I would say, is intentionally so. And I actually think that that's kind of funny. That's the funny part of it.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you have to make them sweary and bloody, at least make them good, like Logan. But then what were we to expect from the makers of The Mod Squad, Road Trip, and The Hangover? A smart, nuanced, and complex take on the character? Come on. This film is basically a bunch of cobbled together ideas and images from other media. No coherent thought or point, no clear thematic statement to make, basically just bad cosplay. And it is so very boring. About an hour and a half is spent convincing us that the protagonist Arthur is a downtrodden, unlucky and pathetic loser, which we all could have surmised in about 5 minutes or less, but never once does it give us a reason to care. It attempts to make him vaguely sympathetic, a man beaten down by life so much that he has to hit back, but again, that's not what makes the Joker as a Batman villain compelling. His lack of clear motivation, his commitment to chaos, is why he's interesting. Here, we mostly just have to watch Joaquin Phoenix do a lot of smoking, dancing, so much dancing, staring at himself in the mirrors and cackling like a demented, pained hyena. That any of this is supposed to make me root for him seems absurd, but it's clearly what the film wants. And like I said, Joaquin does it all very well. It's an impressive transformation and turn from him, particularly physically. But even an Oscar-winning performance like that can't pull this trash out of the gutter. The main problem with it is that it seems to be straining to say something about the lack of healthcare our society has for people with mental illnesses and the way that class and late-stage capitalism play into that. But Phillips is too unskilled of a filmmaker to actually communicate that competently, and so it ends up being more of a rallying cry for edgelords and socially awkward losers. What it thinks it's saying and what it's actually saying are radically different things. Everything from the time setting to some of the narrative turns to the thematic content of the film are thoroughly confused. For example, the film seems to want to reason that a lack of funding for healthcare providers is leaving troubled young men abandoned and posits that this can lead to violent outbursts, when a decision that I assume is not deliberate and absolutely indicative of the lack of care or thought taken in making this spectacle, almost every societal point of failure for Fleck is represented by a woman, often a woman of colour. You can see what that implies, right? The film demonises women, people of colour, and the mentally ill. I truly don't think that this is what Phillips intended, but I find it hard to read it any other way.
It's just I wonder why you think your opinion is important enough to be shared on, I don't know, a platform like YouTube.
Well, I don't know if it's important, but not everything on YouTube is necessarily important, I guess, but I'm trying to
Unique? Special? What word would you use?
Yeah, I mean, I think...
How many cis-cat white guys do we need starting a YouTube channel in their rooms, talking about their opinions on film, games, Trump? How many do we need? Do we need another one? Another one of you?
Phillips seems very pleased with himself, though. The film was infatuated with itself. I don't like using the word pretentious because it's often overused to the point of near meaninglessness, but here I feel it's accurate. He appears to think that this is some profound piece of art akin to the works that he's unsuccessfully aping. With certain films like Taxi Driver and Fight Club, there is the potential for young men, and it is always young men, to misunderstand the message and it not be the film's fault. I know this because I was one of them. I saw Travis Bickle with his mohawk and his shades, and I saw Tyler Durden with his stylish wardrobe and his washboard abs, and I thought, they're cool. I came out of those films getting the anti-establishment, anti-capitalist part of it. But I failed to realise that these characters were being used as examples of the negative outcomes that failures in society produce, not as the solutions for those problems. I didn't get that, like many young men still don't get it, because young and dumb. Because when you go back and you watch these films as an actual adult, the texts are explicit. There's no way you can see what either of those two characters do at the end of their respective films and think, yeah, they're the good guys. Spoilers for those films. The narrator in Fight Club literally has to kill his own toxic masculinity, and the final shot of Travis Bickle we see is him dead on a couch covered in blood. Whereas the last shot we get of Arthur Fleck is this.
And I can't deny it. Many times I thought of cutting out, but my heart won't buy it. But if there's nothing shaking come this here July, I'm gonna roll myself up.
And not long before that we get his triumphant hero shot, which follows his big monologue detailing the ways that society drove him to murder. The message that the film sends, unintentionally through incompetence, is, hey guy, the world not giving you what you're entitled to, people not laughing at your jokes, and the hot girl next door won't have sex with you. Why not just kill a bunch of people? Then you can become the hero of your own narrative. And for the disenfranchised as well. Every element is at odds with the other. It wants to be taken seriously at the same time as presenting us with a character that is a gumbo of simplistic mental health stereotypes that Phoenix has to work very hard to just about get away with. It's a mess. A hollow, dull, muddled mess. But it made $1 billion, so I guess they had to make another one. Joker 2, Folie à Deux.
This whole meta thing you got going on, do you think people are going to be impressed with your attempts to be meta?
I'm not trying to impress people. I think I'm more trying to I don't know, entertain or...
I mean, even this bit, this self-deprecating bit we're doing right now, you're getting off on this in some way.
No, I mean that's not really the point. No, I feel like maybe I have some perspectives on things that maybe people might be. You know what? It's actually maybe better than the first one, marginally. I know that goes against conventional wisdom, and again, I promise I'm not just being a contrarian, but at the very least, it's more interesting as a curiosity. So while it's more boring and narratively thinner than the first one, it is fascinating in a car crash kind of way. It's one of the rare examples of a piece of art that actively hates its core fan base. In that sense, it's kind of punk rock. Spitting at, spewing on, and fly kicking at spectators, but less exciting in that sense. It's positively hostile to the audience in a way that makes it seem like everyone involved with making the first part was so annoyed that they had to come back and make another one because the studio saw all those dollars rolling in that they set out to make it as bad as they possibly could so they wouldn't have to do it a third time. Another quick plot rundown to get you up to speed. First is a short Looney Tunes style cartoon where Joker fights to stop his own shadow from causing chaos, leaving him to blame. Metaphor. Then the film proper begins with Fleck, now in prison, awaiting trial for multiple murders. He's taken to see his lawyer, who tells him that they need to convince the jury that he has a split personality disorder to get him cleared. Then, when attending a music therapy class, he meets Lee, a fellow inmate who tells him that she set fire to her parents' apartment building. They hit it off, and she tells him that she admires him. At an old film screening, Lee starts a fire so they can escape. They share a kiss and a dance, and then they get caught. Arthur's locked in solitary confinement, where Lee then visits him to tell him she's being released. She promises that she'll be at his trial, and then they have sex. Which, sure, prisons do that, right? The trial starts, and sure enough, she's there. The split personality is disputed. Lee and Arthur's lawyer, Marianne, disagree on the defense's approach. Marianne then tells Arthur that Lee has lied to him about her identity, and when she visits him later, she confesses that that is true, that she lied to get close to him. She also tells him that she's pregnant. A bunch of the events of the first film are then rehashed in the trial when witnesses are called to the stand. Arthur decides to represent himself, firing Mary Ann. A group of prison guards then appear to sexually assault the Joker out of Arthur, which leads him to renounce the Joker persona in his closing arguments. Lee's disgusted and she walks out. He's found guilty, and right after the verdict is read out, a bomb goes off, blowing a hole in the court wall. And in the mayhem, Arthur stumbles out into the street. He finds his way to Lee, who is on the staircase from the first film. She tells him to do one and wanders off. He's then taken back to jail. And then the ending, which we'll get to the ending. The decision to make the film a musical is the first hint that something funny is going on here. In fairness, it does make some narrative sense, being that in the final scene of the previous film, Arthur began singing along to That's Life by Frank Sinatra. I like musicals, and I'm not against the idea of this film being one in theory. God knows, in the comic book film genre, we need some innovative, odd and weird choices being made. But this decision is wild, knowing it was always going to piss off the first film's fanboys. When the news leaked about the intention to go in this direction, many online reactions confirmed as much. Though some did think it was a bold choice, to be fair. But just how bad the majority of songs in this thing are is crazy, though. Two sequences work. One, a courtroom rendition of the Joker from the 1964 musical The Roar of Grease Paint, The Smell of the Crowd. And the other, an imagined club tap dance rendition of Gonna Build a Mountain from 1961 musical Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. The rest of the songs do not work at all. It is horrible. This is a jukebox musical, the kind that mostly uses existing songs and has normal dialogue between the musical numbers, unlike a sung-through musical where the entire thing is sung. This kind of musical, I would argue, employs a bit of Brechtian alienation. Brechtian alienation, or the distancing effect, involves a play or a film or a piece of art deliberately distancing itself from the audience by drawing attention to its own artifice. German dramatist and director Bertolt Brecht thought that if an audience was too emotionally involved with the characters, then they would not be able to think about the issues presented in the piece clearly. Ideally, he thought audiences should not be taken out of themselves in order to not be distracted from the big picture meaning or message of a story. So placards, freeze frames, masks, narration, minimal sets or costumes, breaking of the fourth wall, and stereotypical characters are examples of techniques that are used sometimes to achieve this effect. Anything that pushes the audience back and highlights the form of the medium. Wes Anderson does this all the time. Lars von Trier too. When you're watching The Sound of Music or The Wizard of Oz or The Little Mermaid, the audience is expected to understand that the singing of the songs is not actually taking place, that this is a stylistic technique being used to communicate a message. The fun evolution that I think these kinds of musicals add to the Brechtian theory is that often the use of songs in these cases is to communicate the character's inner emotions more vividly. The emotions become the message.
So what makes you think that people won't click off immediately when they realise that you're a charlatan? Just...
Oh, I mean, they usually do, I guess, which is very early on.
I'll
but
tell
like,
you that it is immediately evident.
Some people like it. Some people like the shtick.
I will say, you seem to spend a lot of time and effort saying very little.
The emotions in Joker 2 followed you? Well, I don't know. The film is as relentlessly miserable and drab as its predecessor. It's angry and cynical, and that's about all it's got. The filmmaking is slow and laboured, and it really seems resentful that it even exists. As well as being a musical, the film is also a courtroom drama, where seemingly the first film is on trial. but it's mostly my patience that's being tried. It toils to explain to the audience that they weren't supposed to side with the Joker at the end. Philip seems, with this film, to want to dress down fans of the first film for not getting the point of it, clueless to the fact that they didn't get it because the film that he thought he made was different to the one he actually made. We spend so much time litigating the key points of the previous entry. I mentioned that this film was boring, right? Its pacing is glacial. It's monotonous, tiresome, tedious, and repetitive. Like Philip Silver and the producers were like, what if we made a sequel but we made it really boring? A courtroom drama, yeah? And a musical. And what if we made the whole thing about how much we hate the audience? That'd be hilarious, right? And then for some reason they had to see it through. Which is why the whole thing plays like a joke on the audience. And it's why the ending feels like a punchline. Which is probably deliberate and the point. It is probably the best thing about the film, aside from the two musical numbers I mentioned earlier. The film ends with a fellow inmate approaching Arthur, telling him basically that he's disappointed that he's just some normal loser and not the evil mastermind that he appeared to be. And then he stabs him up. As Arthur dies on the floor, the inmate carves a smile into his own face, becoming the real Joker. Get it? They just made you sit through 4 hours of some deadbeat just being downtrodden, losing at life over and over again. And it turns out he isn't even who you thought you were watching a film about. I mean, honestly, that's funny, almost. It's the cinematic equivalent of holding up a mirror to the audience and going, look at you, you idiot. Wait, so it's a joke. It has disdain for its own audience. It employs Brechtian alienation. There's loads of repetition. And at the centre of it is a sad sack who just wants to do his little jokes on stage. That sounds like... Stuart Lee is the world's 41st best stand-up comedian. He's from Wellington, Shropshire in England, and he first emerged as a comic talent in the late 80s with his comedy partner Richard Herring in the duo known as Lee and Herring, their name working as a playful take on the famous makers of Worcester sauce, Lee and Perrins. Together they did a bunch of TV and radio work, both as writers and as performers. Their final collaborative work was on the 1998 to 1999 Sunday morning sketch comedy show This Morning with Richard, Not Judy, on BBC Two.
Hello. Hey, thank you. I am Stuart Lee. And I am called Richard Herring.
Which is the first place I would have encountered Lee's work.
What's this now? What is this? That was kind of weird, jarring pivot. What's happened?
I want to change perspective. I wanted the change in perspective to be clear that we're moving on to...
So it appears to me that you want a bunch of stupid people to think you're a clever boy. Is that about right?
No, I don't think so. I don't... Maybe. Maybe that is it. Maybe I do want...
Do you think you're clever? Do you think you're a clever boy?
I think I'm not dumb.
Okay.
At least, I hope I'm not dumb.
Well,
I mean, you're saying that like you think I'm dumb, isn't it?
Aye.
The next time I came across his work would have been in 2009 when the first series of Stuart Lee's comedy vehicle aired. In between, Lee had gone back to do solo stand-up shows where he painstakingly crafted his reputation as comedy's most curmudgeonly intellectual, as well as writing for stage and TV. In Comedy Vehicle, Lee set out to thoroughly deconstruct the art of comedy, looking at the different types of jokes, different styles of performance, and the topics that form the basis for many jokes. The show ran for 4 series, totaling in 24 episodes between 2009 and 2016. And it was in episode 2 of the 3rd series that Lee performed what is maybe my favourite piece of stand-up comedy ever. Don't mind me, I'm just going to dissect this frog while I talk to you about comedy. I've been a massive fan of stand-up comedy since I was in my early to mid-teens. My entry would have likely been through sketch comedy shows like Naked Video and The Fast Show, and improv shows like Whose Line Is It Anyway, or British Saturday night variety shows with the likes of Michael Barrymore and Brian Conley presenting. I moved on to enjoy the likes of Eddie Izzard and of course Billy Connolly. I'm Scottish, it's practically compulsory. But my real appreciation for stand-up comedy came when I was 18 and I discovered Bill Hicks. Angry political comedy spoke to the angry young man in me. He also liked to talk about sex and drugs and rock and roll. I thought it was incredibly cool. And thus I was indoctrinated into the fraternity of the bros who think that stand-up comedians are the real philosophers of our time. I got super into George Carlin and Richard Pryor, Lenny Bruce, Chris Rock, David Cross, Sarah Silverman, Dave Chappelle, Doug Stanhope, and the rest. I found, and often still do find, myself quoting bits of stand-up to illustrate a point in conversation. Because while the real philosophers of our time nonsense doesn't stand up to scrutiny, it is true that stand-up comedy and jokes in general are great tools with which to have conversations, important conversations, about life and society. A great comedian can take a difficult subject matter, lace it with humour, and make an audience consider their views in a different way. Or it can just help you articulate something that you hadn't quite found the right words for yet. The laughs make it more palatable. Jokes can be like keys. In the right hands, they can be used to unlock new ideas or uncomfortable truths. A bit of sugar to help the medicine go down and all that. George Carlin, for example, opened one of his HBO specials with an extended bit about abortion in 1996, which is still painfully relevant today.
They're not pro-life. You know what they are? They're anti-woman. Simple as it gets. Anti-woman. They don't like them. They don't like women. They believe a woman's primary role is to function as a broodmare for the state.
Louis C.K. did a brilliant bit on Saturday Night Live about child molesters, which made Kevin Pushak, also known as Nerdwriter, describe Louis as being like a moral detective. The video was obviously made before, you know. By the way, I'll say this here, but this will be evergreen for all my essays in general. If I speak about someone who has, for whatever reason, been cancelled, the chances are I do already know about it. You don't need to come into the comments to tell me. And also, I more than likely do not condone anything that they did in order to get cancelled. But unless it feels relevant to the topic at hand, I probably won't talk about it. So yes, I was a fan of Louis. I still think for a while there he was the best in the business, but I can no longer support or recommend his work. Okay? Okay. Of course, when it comes out down the line that Stuart Lee is actually a terrible person and it's not just a stage persona, then I definitely don't condone that either. Anyway, in tackling their subjects and topics, comedians use a variety of different structures to compose their jokes. For example, there's the classic misdirect, a proper staple like Heinz tomato soup. You know exactly what it's doing, but it's comfortable and it's reliable. You start with a setup that makes an audience think that you're heading one way and then you take them somewhere else entirely. Anthony Jeselnik wields the misdirect like a switchblade.
One of my friends just asked me if I would be the sperm donor for her baby. I said, I don't know. That's a pretty big decision. How old's your baby?
It's disarming. You often find that you've laughed before you can consider whether or not you should be offended. Similar to that is the one-liner. It's basically the same premise, but it distills it down to its barest bones. It's all about precision. Mitch Hedberg mastered it, crafting jokes so tight they were like haikus of absurdity.
I used to do drugs, I still do, but I used to too.
Then there's the Shaggy Dog story, a long rambling tale where the punchline is deliberately underwhelming or almost non-existent. Billy Connolly might spin one of these for 20 minutes or so, weaving a tapestry of digressions and false starts and sidetracks so elaborate you forget you were even waiting for a punchline. The point was the journey, a journey through Billy's Glaswegian mind, where every tangent is filled with charm and swearing. Again, another twist on a similar structure to that is the slow burn, where a comedian will stretch the premise of a joke almost to breaking point, building tension, pushing it as far as it can go before releasing the punchline and allowing air back into the room. Hannah Gadsby did this in Nanette. Sometimes, when the premise of a joke is complex, a comedian like Chris Rock will keep repeating it as a phrase throughout the entire routine. Then there are double entendres, over-exaggerations, slapstick, and observational jokes that all work in completely different ways. I would like to think that I have something to offer a perspective that's maybe a little bit different from most other people out there. And I think that some people I've spoken to in the past seem to have been...
So you do think that you're a special, unique boy? Okay.
The point is that these structures and many others are simply tools, and how effective they are depends on how skilled the comedian is. And while he isn't necessarily my absolute favourite stand-up comedian, Stuart Lee is exceptionally good at using so many of them, often multiples at the same time. And he uses a bunch of these in the episode 2 of series 3 joke that I referred to as my favourite bit of stand-up ever, one that I return to frequently. The joke is about the UK political party UKIP and their anti-immigration stance. The premise of the bit is in response to UKIP politician Paul Nuttall from Liverpool, whom Lee constantly refers to as Paul Nuttalls of the UKIPs, who was quoted as saying,
Bulgarians need to ensure that their brightest and best people stay in Bulgaria and make it economically prosperous, instead of coming to the UK to serve tea and coffee.
Which Lee describes as a new angle on the immigration debate, an idea which he exaggerates and applies to other mass groups of immigrants to the UK through history. The whole bit, all in, is about 10 minutes long. I'm going to go through the steps that it takes and talk a bit about what Lee is doing technically in order to illustrate how great the joke is. Does that sound pretentious to you? Good. Now this frog isn't going to dissect itself. People's anxieties about cultural identities leading to the rise of UKIP as a political force in 2013 is where Lee begins the bit. He has a small dig at the then leader of the party, Nigel Farage, who is known as a bit of a character. Lee informs us that
A character is defined in the Dictionary of Theatre as being something that gives the illusion of being a person.
which he reads from a scrap of paper taken from his pocket. He does this a lot, reading from paper or notes on his hand. It's one of his tools with which to make the audience wonder about how much the show is spontaneous and what is meticulously planned. He also often makes it seem like the show is going off the rails, like the audience is ruining it by not being smart enough to understand his jokes.
This room's unworkable. It's not possible, is it? Look, you can tap. It's not possible to do here and here. You can't work a mixed ability room.
Anyway, this leads into a bit about protest votes, which has a stray shot at UK perennial also-rans, the Liberal Democrats. He then gets to the Paul Nuttall quote, which he also reads from a piece of paper. A bit of repetition there. This sets up the broad premise of the bit. Nuttall was apparently concerned that too many Bulgarians were coming to the UK to live. It's questionable whether or not there's a fourth wall in stand-up comedy. But if there is one, it's made of clear plastic. So it isn't a particularly big gesture when a comedian decides to break the fourth wall. But in TV there is, so when Lee deliberately looks down the lens of a camera at a low angle to him on the stage, he is kind of breaking the fourth wall, while not at the same time. He regularly uses this camera to address a person or people that he believes to be lower than himself, or at least below the pretentious, arrogant persona he assumes on stage. Here he uses it to address Nuttall directly. Sarcastically, he states that Nuttall has
genuine concern for domestic economic prosperity in Bulgaria. I don't doubt that for a minute.
Before suggesting that he should stay in Liverpool to ensure its economic prosperity, instead of attempting to get a seat at the Parliament in London. This is a flip on the old anti-immigration comedy of the likes of Bernard Manning or Jim Davidson or Roy Chubby Brown, who are famous for racistly complaining about immigrants coming to the UK and stealing jobs and committing crimes. Next he goes on to talk about how the apparent objection to skilled immigrants coming to the UK instead of using their skills in their home countries is a different way of looking at the discussion than we're used to.
Here they are, coming over here, their skills.
At this point, he takes us back to about 10 years ago when people were concerned about the influx of Polish people to the UK.
People going, oh, bloody Poles coming over here, bloody Poles coming over here being all Polish and mending everything.
This is the structure that the largest chunk of the bit takes. A repetition of the same idea applied to Indian immigrants 50 years ago, and the Huguenots in the 16th century, and on until he gets back to the beginning of time. With each section he gets more and more mock angry and more absurd. It's a history lesson as well as a joke. At one point he recites an Anglo-Saxon poem.
Rather, well, schnather, Winnemaga, ha! You come over here, Anglo-Saxons, learn to speak the fucking language.
That sounds incredibly pretentious, doesn't it? But that is part of the joke. Can it be clever and pretentious at the same time? Anyway, he repeats this bit until he gets all the way back to the Big Bang. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll have noticed that the repetition, the use of comic tropes, the referring to the piece of paper, the speaking down the lens, all of this could be considered Brechtian. In fact, in another show, Lee actually discusses using the technique.
I want you to laugh in spite of me, not because of me. It's an example of the theatrical practice known as Brechtian alienation. And it is. It's an incredibly high-risk performance strategy that very few people seem to appreciate.
It's something he revels in often. Sometimes he pushes the audience so far away that it seems like it might be impossible to win them back. Repetition is the tool he most frequently uses to do this. Lee uses Brechtian alienation because he's more interested in the audience engaging with the ideas that he's presenting than he is interested in them having a good time or being entertained. He doesn't want them to relax. Entertainment is secondary to him. Though his act is almost always so good that it can't help but be entertainment too. Sometimes it does feel like a game of chicken he's playing with himself to see how far away he can push the audience and then still win them back.
Does that time feel well spent to you?
I think that I am being creative with my time, and I hope that my hope is that people would at the very least be entertained, and maybe they would have a different... Another thing this repetition does is it almost acts like a hook in a song. The way he says,
coming over here,
and the
poor nuttles of the UKIPs
are the main ones he uses in this bit. Also in this bit, he does an extended song/football chant.
Nothing, 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 nothing.
About how great the void of space was before the Big Bang. Okay, so we've travelled back in time, and Paul Nuttall is annoyed about all these
particles of energy that are yet to find a physical form stay in an infinite void of nothing instead of somehow coming together and forming the basis of everything that will ever exist.
The punchline, in so much that there is one, Lee disingenuously says that it isn't fair to make fun of Paul Nuttall, and again asserts that UKIP policy should be taken at face value with genuine concern for Bulgaria. that and the desire to bring back smoking in pubs. It's not a big mic drop ending for the bit, but he knows that he doesn't need one. He's already done everything that he wanted to do. This is why I love the bit so much. It encapsulates so much of what I love about the form. It's smart, it's articulate, it's dumb, it's silly, and it engages with real-world issues in a way that makes you see them from a slightly different perspective. He highlights how much immigrants have brought and contributed to UK culture, and at the same time makes fun of a bunch of idiots. As a son of an immigrant, I particularly appreciate it. In the following episode of Series 3, Lee has another bit about British politics, where he describes the view that the two main political parties in the country have of the poor. In it, he lampoons rich people who resent paying taxes which go towards social services, which in theory should help the poor and less fortunate. At one point, he uses the old down the lens trick to berate a previous audience from a show that he did in Guildford for not getting that it was a joke.
Here they're laughing at you, Guildford. You idiots. It was a joke. And you all just sat there nodding along like it was observational comedy about you. Yes, that's what we think here in Guildford. We're utter vermin.
This 4-minute bit of stand-up comedy delivers a similar message about poverty in a much more concise and entertaining way than the whole 4 hours of the two Joker movies can manage combined. Which is why, when I left the theatre after seeing Joker 2 Folie, Deux, I was thinking about the ending and how repetitive the rest of the film was and how the songs had the weird Brechtian quality to them. And slowly it dawned on me that the film was like a failed Stuart Lee joke. Phillips had pushed us all too far, some sooner than others. The thing about a joke is that even at its most extended, they can be about 20 minutes or so. These two movies kept us far longer and made us pay twice before the punchline. Making this connection though made me think about how the perspective of an artist and the perspective of an audience member can put a piece of art into conversation with another disparate piece of art. Obviously I can't be sure that Phillips wasn't thinking about the stand-up comedy of Stuart Lee when he was making Joker Folie, Deux, but I highly doubt it. I'd be surprised to find out that Phillips even knows who Stuart Lee is. But I thought about Lee almost immediately after finishing the film, and now they will be forever linked in my mind.
Are you aware that you're not very likeable?
I would like to be liked, I suppose.
Yeah, it doesn't concern you that people might watch your videos and think, oh, what an unlikable, pretentious person.
I know I can be, I don't know, abrasive or...
More words, lots of words.
Yeah. Maybe some people will like this. Maybe. And even though Phillips's films are failures to me, they still made me think about late-stage capitalism's effect on mental health services and lonely young men feeling abandoned by the system. Like it or not, it added to the conversation and conversations that I've had in real life about these issues. And they also made me think of better pieces of art. And so back I go to watch Stuart Lee on Paul Nuttall's and the UKIPs again. And again. Repetition, innit? Good. Thank you.
Hug me. I don't mean any of it.
I know.
I don't mean.
Thank you so much for doing that.